Everybody should be treated and compensated fairly. But in the same breath, not everybody is actually equal. And that's the reality of a business. You have some providers, support team members, whoever, that have more external value to the business than others. And we have to understand that, and compensation plans have to recognize that. Definitely important to identify.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Cameron Hemphill here, your host for Medical Millionaire. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune into the podcast. Our goal is to give incredible value and insight for practice owners. So if you're thinking about getting into this amazing world of aesthetics, opening up a MedSpa or wellness clinic, all of these episodes are 100% designed for you and to help take your practice to the next level. So everybody, I have an amazing guest on today, somebody that I've been wanting to interview for a very long time. I want to welcome Jessica Hunter to the show. She's out of Vancouver, Canada. She owns Hunter Consulting. She has been consulting for over a decade in medical aesthetics. She comes with an MBA in business, so she understands the business side of how to run an effective practice. And also, she's worked with over 100 practices one-on-one. So many hours of study, many hours of connecting and helping practice owners scale. Jessica, I'm honored. Thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the show.
Wow, thanks, Cam. It's such a great honor to be here. A big fan of the show, obviously. Love your stuff, so thanks.
Absolutely. I know that the audience would love to know more about your amazing background. Can you just lean in on that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I always say I fell into the medical aesthetics space prior to consulting in medical aesthetics. I spent 10 years in medical device and supply. So I worked for some big Fortune 100 companies doing strategic planning and product implementations and new strategic product launches. So for 3M and Stryker. So I did that before even kind of falling into the medical aesthetic field. And I got recruited by Allergan to be an external consultant for them. So that's sort of how I kind of joined, our little cult of medical aesthetics. And I consulted for them with their top clients for 5 years before going out on my own. And it really just was an opportunity where I just saw a really big need with, surgeons, plastic surgeons, NPs, business owners that were creating their own businesses, and they were amazing providers, but they just really didn't understand the business fundamentals. And I just saw a gap there, and I saw how much I could impact their business. And it just kind of fuel that fire in me to really want to be like, okay, we can create something that you can understand, and I can help you create a really good plan that makes sense for you to continue to help you grow and scale and just achieve those goals that you wanted. So that's sort of how I got into it. And now I'm stuck. I mean, I'm obsessed with the industry. I have the best clients, I always say. And, I just want to really help them, achieve their long-term goals.
It's so important. I've been going to conferences for many years. I've also been in the industry for about a decade. I go to conferences and I see a tremendous amount of clinical study, clinical courses, clinical classes, which, hey, I don't want to discredit that. Very important. And I appreciate that you bring this MBA background of business to the industry more than I could actually ever express, because I've been trying to teach this stuff for years. Guys, if you're going to run a practice, you have to run it like a business. And so I want to ask Jessica, who's on with us today. Let's respect her time and all of the key insights she's going to give to us today. What I want you guys to understand, and what you're going to get out of this particular interview, is how to set pricing based on data, not emotion. And I want you guys to know the most important number every single month that you should be tracking. And she's going to lean in on that. Common mistakes in staff compensation and how to fix them. Smart ways to incentivize performance without overpaying. And when and how to shift from hourly compensation to commission-based pay to performance. I think that there's a lot of questions around that. So we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty stuff with that. Jess, the first thing I want to ask you is the financing stuff. Help the listener understand, what is the biggest financial mistake you see MedSpa owners making when it comes to pricing, understanding their profit margins, those types of things?
Yeah, first and foremost, I think the biggest issue is that we don't understand the financial landscape of our business. So I think the very first thing anytime I work with a client is I want to understand your business and your particular needs in that businesses, the services that you offer, and understand your margins, because these benchmarks that we sometimes throw out at conferences, Cam, as you see, are just that. They're benchmarks and they're not relative always to your exact needs and kind of what you're offering. So very, very first and foremost is like when we understand someone's business, yes, your P&L tells a story. That's your profit and loss for sure. I mean, that's something that kind of gives you a real general baseline. But if you don't have someone who's going to look at your monthly service revenue and understand the breakdown of where your service revenue is coming from, that's a key miss. You have to understand that. So that's number one. And then when we understand that and we say, okay, we know where our revenue is coming from, we know sort of our service mix. Okay, how profitable are each one of those services? And to really understand that, you have to go line by line. So for example, if we're going to look at neurotoxin, a really easy example, I want to understand, of course, that product cost per unit. That's for sure. I want to understand how much we pay that staff, both as that hourly rate as well as that commission combination every time we do that service. I want to understand any miscellaneous consumables, syringe, alcohol swab, gloves. I want to understand our overhead costs per the allocated time that we do that service. Now, it's a big difference if we do a service in 15 minutes versus 30 minutes. And I think that's a key component that we need to understand as well. And so when we look at all of those things, then we can definitely understand, okay, how much does this service actually cost us in the allocated time that we schedule? So that's really, really important. You can't even think about how you're going to price that service without understanding some of those costs, if that makes sense, Cam.
Jeez, I love it. What a well-rounded answer. I mean, I have talked to so many practice owners, and a lot of the times I hear most of my revenue comes from injectables. Right.
Mhm.
And I'm a financier myself. I invest in various things and understand how to read a P&L and a balance sheet. I've studied finance, and I think it's absolutely crucial for a practice owner to understand finance. An entrepreneur, if you're bringing in revenue, you need to understand P&L, profits, those types of things. What do you see, right? Like as you're working with practice owners, because I hear this, and I'm not in the business of dissecting a P&L. You are. When you see a P&L, let's say you look at 10 P&Ls in the last month. How many of them are accurate to your standards for them to really understand how much money they're making? Any of them? I'm not sure.
Yeah, like again, it's just a snapshot of someone's business in their fiscal year, which could be a calendar year or whatever year, but their fiscal year. And so, although I think a lot of consultants or financial advisors are going to look at that, when they give that to my client, they have no idea what they're looking at, and it doesn't have enough rigor and detail to really understand maybe where you're losing money, where you're gaining money, what sort of corrections or adjustments that you can make to be more profitable. Right. So the goal is to be in this industry long term, hopefully, right? Like you want to have a business more than 24 months. We know that, within 24 months or less is usually where we see, someone not be successful. So if you can get over that hump and start generating profit at that stage, that means that you're going to have some more longevity in here. So, the P&L, again, it separates it between, your cost of goods and obviously your revenue, your marketing expense, sometimes, your overhead. Usually it's not even separated that much. So we'll take that and we'll say, okay, I want to know exactly, how much our cost of goods are, how much our marketing spend is, what our overhead is, and any other, other kind of associated costs, like might be your car, might be some education investments, that kind of thing. And then we want to understand the margins because all of it's relative to the amount of revenue you generate. So when we take a look at your marketing spending, for example, that should be really relative to, the revenue you're generating and or your forecasting for the future. So that's part of it that really needs to kind of be ironed out and understood instead of just a general, these are my expenses. I need to decrease my expenses to make more money. That is usually the last place that we're going to go when we're looking at something like.
Yeah, totally. And what would you say, like out of all the services that are done, which ones carry the highest margin? Which ones are the least profitable service treatments?
Yeah, so it really depends. So I think it's really interesting when we ask this question, and I always ask this question to my clients, where do you think you're most profitable? Because you have to understand of how you're analyzing that data. So if you're looking at, like, for example, a laser treatment, and you have a certain, device that you're looking at. So now we have to understand, okay, the consumables that device has, of course, does it have a lease payment? Does it have a warranty payment if we're kind of 2 years or longer? And then have we averaged that out based on how many of those treatments we do a month? So let's pretend, just for some round numbers, it does have a lease payment and it's $2,500 a month. And let's say that we average about, 15 of those treatments a month. Then you can average that, and you can put that into your costs when you're trying to allocate how much that treatment costs you, right? So it's really important to understand that. Laser hair removal is probably the prime example I get all the time, where I'm like, oh, Jess, I make tons of money off this. I'm like, well, do you? Because laser hair removal is really saturated in our market, and we can only charge a certain amount of money to perform these services. And when you allocate all the other costs, as our staff, any sort of warranty or leasing in this, as well as the time allocation that it takes with our overhead, is it profitable? Is it really a treatment we want to invest time in? I mean, those are the things that you need to understand before you make that. It's not, I can't really give you a black and white answer. What's most profitable? It really depends. And it depends on lots of things. And it can depend on volume and how much you're paying your staff, right? So somebody who's doing a laser treatment versus an RN doing an injectable, those are two different compensation plans that are definitely different, and that will definitely affect our overhead profit for that service.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. I knew that you were going to say that. I mean, every situation is different, right? Every device is different. Depends on the lease payments you have. It depends on your marketing costs. I'm sure you factor in the marketing costs based upon if they are trying to acquire patients for that particular service. Like, I don't know how granular you get, but I think, guys, if I'm hearing her correctly, the foundational approach to having a very successful business and a very successful practice is understanding your numbers and understanding finance. And I think that you really want to put yourself in a position to understanding the fundamentals before you just go buy a $200,000 device. What does that
Absolutely.
really look like? Right. So
Yeah. And
walk
it's an
us through
important
that
decision.
part. Because I see it all the time. If I buy the device, the patients will come. And it's
Yeah.
like, okay. You might want to, be careful of that. Do your study, right? And understand the financing behind it.
Yeah. And first and foremost, you have to understand too, like, who is your current client? I mean, who is your current client in your database? Is there, a combination service that you can already, educate these clients on, that there's a need? So I think that's the first place I always start. I'm like, okay, if we want to buy, MSculpt Neo, do we already have a bucket of clients that are on a GLP-1 that would have a need for that? Can we do a segmentation of those clients and create urgency to do that? Is that even an option? I mean, if you're just getting a device where it's totally outside of your realm, and who you're currently trying to A, acquire, or B, already have, then you got to ask yourself, like, is this really a good investment? And then the second thing is capacity. Do you have the capacity to take something else on? Do you actually have, the providers, this physical space, and the opportunity to do that? I think sometimes we think, we just want more. We want what's ever new, what's ever trending. And we haven't really taken a look at, one, who our demographic is, who our current client is, and who we want it to be. And then the second piece is a capacity issue for sure.
Yeah, it's almost like I'm going to go get another, the fancy object because competition has it close by. We have to have it. That's a dangerous cycle. That is a
I
dangerous.
wish we never looked at competition. I mean, I'm a big believer in, like, steadfast in terms of, like, what your goals are and your strategic plan, and just kind of ignoring the outside noise, because it can be all consuming. And with social media, I find my clients are, this person's offering $899 Botox, and this person's, and I'm saying, listen, we can totally take that and we can look at that pricing. Does that make sense for you? Are you losing money on that? So what is the goal of that? I think that brings me to memberships a lot when we talk about that, and membership pricing. It needs to make sense. If it doesn't financially make sense, then why are we doing that? And I think, it's like generating all this revenue where we're like, wait, we actually lost money, on that. So how does that help you get ahead? And I think those are the hard questions sometimes we kind of miss when we get excited about doing promotions or events or implementing a membership. We kind of need to just take a step back and really analyze, what are we trying to do? What are our prices? Does it make sense? What's our return on this before we kind of jump the gun on it?
What are your thoughts on memberships? And before you jump in, it's if you talk to private equity financier, it's almost like this creates a liability because the services aren't rendered yet on the balance sheet. And then if you think of it on a different approach, it also can increase retention rates
Mm,
and make a patient sticky, right? So I mean, I understand both sides of that coin. You live in it all the time. I think there's benefits and non-benefits. What is your
great.
take on it?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's benefits and non-benefits. I think, and the term membership is pretty broad, right? There's all these different kind of nuances you can create. But I think, when we think about membership, the goal is, again, increasing patient frequency and increasing patient volume. So you're trying to get people in more often. And then you're trying to get people to do additional services. So, your person who comes in every 2.5, 3 months for Botox, we're trying to cross them over to get a clear and brilliant, an IP, like whatever. And I think that we kind of forget about what the purpose of the membership is, and that's what it is. And so when we're just doing something where, they're coming in for chemical peel or hydrofacial and some of these, maintenance services, but there's no actual kind of strategy behind, okay, well, why are we doing this at, $99 or $129? And, effectively we're, breaking even on this, or maybe not generating any money on it. I mean, what's the point of it? So I do think, when you have packages and you sell packages, and so again, you're rendering obviously that payment up front and then providing the service later, it almost has a very similar impact to that, although you've already got the payment, right? Versus that membership, which is a reoccurring payment. So I think there's, kind of goods and bads, of course. And I think it just needs to be structured in a way that allows you to sort of get to what your goals are with it. I think doing something where we can create VIP pricing, for example, can be really beneficial if our promotions and everything align with that. So if we're still going to do monthly promotions, again, on a discount for neurotoxin being our easy example, why would someone join our VIP program for membership discounted pricing? So that all has to play into it. And when people ask me like, oh, my membership isn't successful, I'm like, well, we kind of, go down the rabbit hole, and it's like, well, of course it's not successful. Why would someone join this program and still, get your emails every month on 10 different promotions you're doing? Of course it's not successful. So I think all of that needs to be taken into consideration, and then just taking a step back and saying, okay, this is actually what the point of it is. It might not be the ultimate revenue generator, which I actually personally don't believe memberships are. I believe they have another kind of factor in there in terms of retention, and then obviously volume and frequency. That's what they're for, just like all other membership programs kind of in and around the world.
Yeah, I mean, have intent, have a purpose. I mean, have strategy. I would suggest studying some other practices, reach out to your colleagues who actually have a successful membership program. And if I'm hearing you correctly, Jess, it's about frequency. It's about educating them on the other services that you have. So not necessarily cross sell, but I guess cross sell is the word. But it gives you the ability as a provider to create this in-depth relationship and build on a treatment plan where they're going to get the outcome they're looking for. And there's an exchange, there's a value of exchange there. And if your membership plan is not driven around frequency, increasing the cost per ticket, if you will, increasing your patient lifetime value, yeah, I think those are some of the very fundamental things people should look for. Not just, we're going to create a membership plan because
Everybody's got one.
everybody's got one.
Everybody's got one,
Yeah.
Sally down the street has one, and it needs to have, chemical peels and dermaplaning, and I think you're totally right, Cam. We just lose sight of the goal and the objective of it, and what we're trying as a business trying to accomplish with it. And then again, I think when you see, private equity come and you said, listen, this is what we do. This is sort of our program with our membership. This is, we have this kind of 3 months where we build a relationship, and they get kind of maintenance services. And then, they have this relationship with our esthetician who suggests, a more intense treatment, a more laser resurfacing, or something that's more significant in A, cost, and B, outcomes. And there's that trust there. And now we can do that, and we can, jump into that. That's where it really pays off. That's what makes sense, right? So that's sort of my thoughts on membership, but I guess in a very broad sense.
No, I'm glad you touched on it. I think it's a question that comes up a lot, actually. In me working with as many practices as I have, it seems to come up quite often, and I feel like only a fraction of the industry has actually nailed it. Truly.
Agree. I agree.
So, I mean, shoot, I'm glad we talked about it. The other thing I want to talk to you about too, and I know that you are an expert on this, and I think a lot of practice owners struggle with this approach. It's, how does a medical aesthetics practice, a wellness center, how do the owners approach staff compensation? Like, especially when deciding between like commission, performance based, hourly pay. How do you look at that? That's a big question. I
Mm.
know a lot of practice owners struggle with it. Like, what's your playbook there?
I mean, this is probably one of my favorite topics. I think if anyone's ever seen me speak, I always take the opportunity to speak on staff compensation, and for a couple of reasons. One, I mean, it's a black hole for sure in our industry, but I always say it's sort of like the wild, wild west in medical aesthetics. It's like there's not really this sort of like book or kind of playbook to follow, and everybody does their own thing. So I think it's a really, really good topic to talk about. So first and foremost, I would say, my main thing about staff compensation is that we want our staff to all be treated fairly, for sure. Everybody should be treated and compensated fairly. But in the same breath, not everybody is actually equal. And that's the reality of a business. You have some providers, support team members, whoever, that have more external value to the business than others. And we have to understand that, and compensation plans have to recognize that, definitely in 2025. So I personally love doing a combination of hourly and a commission structure. And the reason I love that is twofold. One is I do believe that having an hourly wage for our clients or our staff or our providers gives them sort of onus into more of the whole team atmosphere. It's one of those things where if you have somebody who's just on a compensation that's just a percentage of commission, they kind of plug in, plug out. They kind of go and do what they need to do, and then they kind of leave. And we miss a little bit of that team atmosphere, a little bit of pitching in for each other. And so I think doing an hourly rate helps with that. And then the second piece is I think when you do a commission is that really allows you to empower your, not just providers, but all your staff to have some skin in the game. I think it allows them to be empowered to generate more income and, really understand the business and really invest themselves in the business. And so that's definitely what I always suggest to my clients is we build something that makes sense. Now, with staff compensation, this whole idea that someone's not treated, that not everybody is compensated the same is based on level of expertise and the value that they bring to the business, as well as how much they actually provide for the business, right? So I think those two things we have to consider. So how valuable they are. They might be someone who's been there for a long time. They have a big clientele list. Maybe they're a trainer. And then obviously the revenue they generate for the business is the second fold that we really want to kind of understand. So those two pieces is how we create compensation plans, at least for like a really kind of bare minimum of how that works.
I like it. There's a lot to unpack there. And it's okay. So let's talk about performance-based compensation.
Okay.
Let's look at two roles. Okay. And I think both of these roles are extremely critical to a practice running with efficient understanding of team structure and profits. Let's call it that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take a role that is front desk. Okay. Front desk, phone calls coming in, velocity, let's just take the practice is spending correctly on marketing, 10 to 12, 15% of top line revenue on marketing. It's kind of my KPI for people and what I've seen out there be very successful. And phone calls are coming in. They are booking online. There's website inquiries. And then I want to talk about that role. And then the next role I want to talk about is the provider that is bringing in 500 grand, $1 million. Let's break that down. How important is that front desk person through your eyes to the practice? Like, because what I see is they are undervalued, underpaid, and undertrained.
Absolutely. They're so important. And I think, so there's two folds here. Absolutely. We want to be able to give them the resources and support to be successful. And that could come in some form of training. Absolutely. But what I always say is training is sort of one and done. Okay. Training is like, here, I've kind of motivated you. I've given you, some snippets of some tools, but what have I left behind that you can implement to be successful? And I think the more you can honestly give a really clear kind of map or flow of what that patient journey looks like and our expectations for that person, the more successful they are. So for example, for a front desk person, if you don't have a really nice cheat sheet of all the services you provided and FAQs with all of them, you need that. That sounds basic. Absolutely. But someone's going to call and they're going to say, hey, I'd like to book in for a thermofrax, whatever it is. And you need them to, and they're going to say, what's my downtime? How much is it going to cost? Can I be breastfeeding? Can I drink that night? Like, these are things that, as a really great support team member or receptionist, they need to be able to answer, and they need to be really educated about. But I can't expect them to know all this for 20 different services. Right. And so I would say giving them some of those tools and resources at their fingertips is really helpful. And then the second piece is that flow, right? That patient journey flow. So we're giving them these answers. How are we scheduling them? What does that look like? What's their next step in that, for that journey of that patient, from their end, as expectations? And so I'm a big believer, expectations are everything. They start on the job description when you're hiring, by the way, and they flow right through to be really consistent. And you're constantly touching base saying, hey, remember, this is what we do. This is how this flow goes. And you're giving them that sort of, again, you're empowering people to take onus of being a part of the business and investing in the success of the business. So I think that's really important. Jumping to provider roles, that's a little bit different. We're in a service provider business, and we generate revenue mostly from people providing a service. And so we do lean into our providers as our being general, revenue generators. That's just how it is. And so what I do believe is that, you do compensate someone based on expertise and experience. 100%. I'm a big believer in tiered systems. So if someone comes to you and they've got, 5+ years of experience as an injector, first and foremost, they can do 5 years worth of injectable techniques, product use, multiple syringes at one time. There's a bunch of value just that intrinsically comes there. And the second thing is that you need to understand, what is your, how much do you do an hour? You want to find this out before you even start with them. And so what does that look like? How many patients do you see? What is your time slot for that? So that I can make a really good compensation plan based on what your expectation is for revenue generation each month. And it should be tiered. As you get to different stages, you get more money in your compensation plan. That's just how it works. I make more money and you make more money. And our margins will support that, versus giving someone just some flat fee of, hey, here you go. You asked for this. Have at her, and let's hope for the best. Again, it's just empowering people to really be in charge of how they're compensated, how they're making money, and motivate them to be invested in the business.
Totally. So provider based, that particular role, paid on experience, paid on performance, tier
Mm-hmm.
based,
Yep.
everything that aligns with the company's objective, the company's role, the company's goals for the year, for the following years, whatever that looks like. Like, that should be also the driving force, right? And how they build their tiers around that, I would assume.
Absolutely. And the tiers, right, Cam, would change based on the services they provide. Like, that's a
Okay.
key thing, right? A
Yeah.
junior esthetician that is doing services that are in between maybe 100 and 150, let's just say, revenue generating, versus someone who is a laser technician who primarily is selling packages, that are a couple $1,000s each. Those are different. And again, someone who's an injector versus maybe someone who is a nurse practitioner and sort of also has that hybrid role of being a medical director. Those are all compensated and tiered differently based on, obviously, the role, but then the revenue that we expect them to generate. Because a junior esthetician isn't going to do 50K a month. That's just the reality of it, right? And so you have to understand that. And so it has to be really, outlined that way, to be very particular to realistic expectations, and then provider roles of what they can actually do within the time period that they're working.
I love it. All right, I'm going to flip the script for a sec. What if we do not do this? What are the downfalls of us not compensating front desk? And I believe that the front desk, whoever's taking these phone calls, these inquiries, they need a cheat sheet. They need to be trained. They need sales training, and they need to have performance based comp. Would you agree on the performance based comp for front desk?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, all right. So, if they are not trained, if you underpay the front desk, and maybe I'm using the word wrong, front desk, admin, executive assistant,
Yeah.
receptionist, whatever fancy term we want to put on it, you guys all get what I'm saying. If they're not set up for success, what are the downfalls? Because what I see and when I'm talking to practice owners is, I'm a big fan of online booking, huge fan of online booking. I think everybody that's tuning in knows that. But what's interesting is what I'm consistently hearing still is more people call than they book. And how many phone calls come in a month? And how many missed opportunities do you have? And are you listening to the phone calls that the front desk is having? Are you honing in on that? Do you have phone software that records and has how many calls came in, where they come from? and you take the time to tune in to listen to the phone calls. Like,
Yeah.
if they don't do that, how, like, there's a lot of money that's lost right there.
Yeah. And think about this, the people that are online booking are typically repeat clients. So they know what they're booking, they know the services they want. Now, the inquiries, to your point, that are coming in via the phone are new patients. They're looking for more information. So, how important is that to convert that person to come see us and have a really great experience? It's vital. And so, I think to your point, online booking serves this great need of being fast and efficient for typically repeat clients. That's typically what it is. Whereas our front desk person is that person to has the opportunity to really educate, credential who we are, what we do, why we do it, and really be able to follow that person down their, down the path. And so if we don't have a software system, to your point, that will record calls or kind of see where, this person goes down the funnel, I mean, they just kind of get lost in the abyss. And if we're spending $10,000 on external marketing tools and our objective mostly might have a landing page, but maybe our objective mostly is for them to call, gain a little bit more information so that they'll book with us, and we just lose them. I mean, what is the point of spending that money? So to your point, absolutely. It's hand in hand. Like, people are like, oh, I don't want to, I don't want to compensate everybody with, a commission structure. I won't have any money. I'm like, you have to understand how you're doing it, and you have to understand how the margins work. That's impactful. But if you don't do it, you have to understand what a waste of money it is. All these other things that you're investing in, it's just a complete waste of money. And I would say that, that reception role, that support role, I always call it, or that front desk, it does have to be the right person. Like, I would say, like, if you find that right person, let's keep them. Let's educate them. Let's give them all the tools and the resources they need to be successful. I think what you see too, Cam, is like sometimes it's just not the right person. And my clients have a hard time kind of letting that person go. They call in sick. They're not invested. They're not really, into it. And I would say at that point, like, it's easier just to cut them and find the right person and really train them up and invest that time, so you're not just spinning your wheels.
Slow to hire, quick to fire, you guys.
Yeah, yeah. It's easier said than done, though. It's easier said than done.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, yeah. I think sometimes we keep people around longer than they want and that we want.
Yeah, I mean, I still see it today. I mean, I see people spending a decent amount on digital marketing, spending a lot of time on Instagram, Facebook, digital ads, SEO, all this stuff. And then they don't have the systems. They don't have the CRM. They don't have the online booking. They don't have the tracking. They don't have the attribution mechanics. They don't understand, like, the true KPIs that they're supposed to have. It's almost like you were told you were supposed to spend money on marketing, so you are, but then there's no way to handle the lead flow on the call side or on the inquiry side or on the online booking side. So yeah, you know what? And if you have somebody that's great, to your point, if they do leave, it's because there's an issue. They're not compensated correctly. If they're great, imagine them leaving and you having to find somebody else and training them up to what that person was. So if you guys have someone great and you feel like they're not, like, the comp plan is not correct, I think this is the time to really assess that.
Absolutely. And like, I mean, we're not really talking about this today, but when we're talking about our staff, like, I'm a big believer in quarter check-ins. And these are, you dedicate time. This isn't running, by the front desk being like, hey, how are you doing today? This is you dedicating time, giving them questions beforehand, letting them come sit down with you, and you reviewing the questions together. Tell me about what you're loving in your job. If I could remove one thing from you today that you do that you dislike, what would that be? Tell me if you feel like you're compensated fairly. If not, how would you like to be compensated? Like, have this dialogue with, like, no interruptions, sort of dedicated time for this person. And you'll find they're going to tell you so many things. But if you don't do this in a frequency and a cadence that, makes sense, it just gets lost in the shuffle. And so anyways, I'm a big believer in, like, allocating that time for all of your staff and giving them that opportunity to, you just sit back and you say nothing.
Super
And they've
helpful.
had some time with the questions, and you ask the questions again in person, and then they've already had time to digest and think about the answers, right? And then they can communicate that to you. And the wealth of knowledge, because I do this for my clients all the time, that comes out is like unbelievable. You're like, oh, I didn't realize she doesn't care about the hourly rate. She just wants to know that she's going to get her, monthly treatment covered, or, wants something for her mom. Like, it's so crazy, but if you don't ask, you don't know. So kind of off topic.
No, I mean, stop assuming, have the conversation, set expectations up front, then have the continuous conversation and make adjustments, be willing to make adjustments. And then the other side of that is the provider too. So if you have a rock star provider and you're not having those conversations or expectations aren't set or the compensation may be off and you know it, this could be a recipe for disaster. Like some of these
I
providers are
agree.
bringing in a lot of money for the practice and they need to
Yeah.
be
And
treated well.
absolutely. I think one of the things too, just talking about providers and compensation is when I go through and I'll do a whole quarterly assessment for all the providers of my clients and we'll take a look and we'll do their hourly and their commission and any retail commission they might have. And we break that down. Like, what did they make an hour? What did we make an hour? What kind of revenue did they do an hour on, month by month basis and quarter by quarter? And then you sit down and you communicate to that to them, because I guarantee you if they make $35 an hour, as their wage, and they also have a commission structure, and you say, well, do you know how much you made last month? They have no idea. They honestly have no idea. And so if you can say, hey, actually, you're saying you want $38 an hour. Do you know that you averaged $65 an hour last month with your commission and they're like, oh, okay. That kind of awareness and transparency. And that only happens when, again, you create a compensation plan that is really based on, that sort of credentials of expertise, experience, and then, again, sort of how productive or, how profitable they are. And you can be transparent like that with the entire staff. Absolutely transparent. Because when you say that out loud and then, you say like, listen, you have that opportunity to get to Sui's, Sujo's, whatever comp plan. Once you have that level of expertise and you're generating that kind of revenue, you have that opportunity. You're not there yet, but you have that opportunity. You can talk transparency. And then it doesn't become this hiding, of like, we can't say that, Jessica makes X amount an hour and Sui doesn't or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
fully open there. And that really is like a sigh of relief in a lot of clinics when I come in. I'm like, listen, we need to restructure this in a more effective long-term way for you to be profitable and for your providers to stay long-term. I mean, it just has to make sense for both parties.
The hours worked, the patients that were serviced, the treatments that were sold, the products that were sold. I mean, all this should just be housed in the EMR system. And that way you can pull these reports, right? They pull the reports. And so then it's not like a daunting task to do at the end of the month, the quarter, whatever you guys want to do. Yeah. And I mean, I have seen to where providers should have stayed with practices, but they left because the conversations weren't had and they thought that they were underpaid and actually they were paid appropriately and the people who lose are actually the provider and the practice. Right? um,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so the other thing I want to talk to you about is I have yet to hear a practice does not want to scale. I feel like every practice I talk to, they want to scale, they want to get bigger. Maybe they don't want to have two locations or three or four or five, but they all want more patients. I don't think I've talked to a practice that's like, no, we don't want more patients. I haven't. And so it's a cash pay marketing, sales business, really. What are some of the, if they want to scale and they want to do it efficiently and effectively, what are some of the key financial metrics they should be looking for, like weekly, monthly, to make smart decisions? Not just, I want to scale, I'm going to do 20% this year because.
Right.
Okay, we get that. How are you going to generate 20%? Are you going to spend more on marketing? Are you going to spend less on marketing and have a better conversion rate? Are you going to systematize your stuff? Like, what are some of the things that you could help our listeners from that aspect?
Wow, it's a big question, but I'm going to just push it back a little bit for a second and say, for everyone I know that wants new patients, and for sure, we should always be continuing for patient acquisition. That's just part of the game. I want us to take a step back and say, like, have we actually maxed out our current patient population? What are they doing every time they see us? So, for example, if you don't know your average neurotoxin transaction for all of your patients, that's something you should know. If you're doing anywhere between like 25 to 35 units per person that you're seeing in, by the way, a half an hour time slot, you have capacity to grow that. That would be the first thing when someone says like, oh my goodness, I need more providers. Nope. Nope, you don't. You need to grow that because we know the average is 45 to 55. So I want, and that's even, I would
You're
suspect
talking
it
on
needs to
utilization
go.
rates, right?
Yeah, utilization, right? So again, so what I want you to think about is like, again, with all of our current clients, are we really maximizing? Are we at any sort of like capacity limitations with that? Are our providers doing as much as they could be with the patients that they do have? That's the first thing. And in the time frames, these really experienced providers do more in less time, which of course makes them more profitable. That's just the rule of thumb. If you can see 4 patients in an hour for neurotoxin versus 2, of course we're probably going to generate more, revenue. So that's the first thing. I think we look at our providers and say, like, listen, how are we doing in terms of actual, generation in terms of revenue for everybody we're seeing? That's the first thing, and because we can do scheduling changes. We can align different products and different sort of combination treatments that are going to allow us to generate more revenue in less amount of time. That's the first and foremost, and that's just profitability. That's just how like when someone says to me, Jess, I want to be more profitable by the end of the year. My first thing is to look at your services and see how we're pricing everything and aligning everything. That's the first thing. And the second thing is to look at your scheduling and say, like, okay, now that we've assessed this, have we made this as optimized and as efficient as possible to generate the most? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, I think, when we're being like, we want to scale and grow, it's like, okay, are we at capacity with all of our services? Like I said, are they generating the kind of revenue we need them to generate? And then do we have, things that need to be kind of worked on a little bit more before we add a new laser, a new service? We bring in, something. Do we have that capacity to take that on? For example, we want to bring in GLP-1s, but we don't have a nurse practitioner. Well, have we done the assessment of what that's going to look like maybe to bring in someone of that caliber and how much we're going to pay them per hour and how many patients we're going to need to generate each hour that they're working to make sure that makes sense? That's just like the baseline there. And so I think when we're thinking about growing, I always take a step back saying, like, it's typically we're not needing a new location. I would say it's very uncommon, or like, maybe let's say 10% of my clients where we're like, oh, wow, we're at capacity.
Yeah.
We need a new location.
Yeah.
That's not where the growth could come from. The growth is more about efficiencies, operational efficiencies, strategically servicing those, like the service and the pricing and our patient, actual volume, aligning all of those so that we're just more profitable. And I would say my clients I deal with now, it's not necessarily they want to grow more revenue. They can be doing $6-7 million in revenue. It's more like, how do I increase my profit? How do I increase my profit? Because if you were doing, and just for abstract numbers, if you're doing like, $5 million in revenue, you have a nice business. But if you only are, $500,000 in profit every year that you do that, well, we probably have some problems.
Yes.
Right. And so that's more of the crucial thing now. It's about if you want to sell, if you want to make a transaction in the future, you really have to understand, what are these firms looking for? Because just because you generate a ton of revenue, you need to be profitable. That needs to make sense, because why would someone take you over? So there's other things that obviously come into consideration, but I mean, everybody talks about your EBITDA. Your EBITDA is your forefront, your foundation of how profitable your business is. And that needs to make sense. So we talk about scaling and growing. I would say most people they're not even there yet. They need to understand how to be more profitable with what they have before they can even invest. And again, that's their bottom line. That's really going to help them.
Yeah. I mean, aesthetics practices trade on EBITDA. That is your profit. That is your gross to net. That's the take home. That's the number that they trade at. The higher the EBITDA, the higher the multiple valuation you get. Okay, this is not a
Absolutely.
SaaS-based software company
Yeah.
that you trade on revenue, right? And you make a great point. So, two things. One of the things that you said was the average capacity or utilization is 45 to 50%. When I look at a medical aesthetics practice, 50% of the costs are fixed. I could be wrong in that, but that's kind of based on my analysis. Most of the costs are fixed. Now you have the performance-based comp, but that also contributes to cash and net income too. So if I have a practice, or I'm a practice owner and I want to grow, you're obviously saying like the last resort is another location, because chances are highly that you're not at capacity. Before I introduce another service, another treatment, buy an expensive laser because I want to grow 20% this year. Let's look at capacity. Let's look at utilization. And there's great softwares out there that can give you these numbers. And I think that's one of the most critical numbers you can look at. And I'm not the consultant, Jess is,
Yeah. Yeah, I
but
agree.
you
I mean,
know,
I think, yeah, this is to your point. Just, this industry has become more and more sophisticated every single year. So 10 years ago when I entered, I mean, to be honest, I don't think we had the sort of systems and softwares that are available that were particular to our industry, at least, that allowed us to pull the kind of reports and data that we need. And furthermore, also allowed us to have a bunch of other integrations and whatnot that are critical for success, I believe, in this industry. But, now these sort of, these sort of systems are so readily available and so part of a necessity. If you can't pull this information from the software that you're currently using, you're not in the game. Like, you don't understand your business, because just having an EMR that can book in patients and send email reminders or text reminders, that's like the bare minimum. That's not even the minimum, actually. That's just like, that's not what you need. You need to be able to know what your providers are doing every single month. You need to know the spread from your service mix. You need to understand if you can put your consumables in there, pull that. There's a plethora of things that you need, but these systems can do that. And they're at that level of sophistication that you're talking about, Cam, that is part of, like, when I consult someone after we do financial assessment, you and I talked about this, we go into operations and say, like, hey, do we have the actual platform that is going to allow you to grow? Do we have something that can do everything that we need it to do and pull the kind of data and reports that are going to enable you to understand your business, so that we know, where the downfalls are, or where the opportunities are? Because if you don't, that's part of the implementation that we need to do.
100%. And I mean, like what I saw too, when utilization rates were low, was there was big lack in the marketing spend, and they'd want to go both on GLP-1s, and everybody, it's like everybody's running to GLP-1s right now. And I do think that there's a time and a place, and the margins are great, and it's sticky, and it's effective. And I'm a big believer there. But I think before you run into what is the next service and treatment, understand your utilization rates, understand your marketing to spend ratios based on revenue to spend. And should you be spending more on marketing to actually increase the utilization rates before you bolt on the service? Like, those are some of the things that I think about.
Mhm.
But before, like, you and I were having a conversation, it was last week, I believe, before we jumped on here. And you were saying that most of the practices that want to exit are doing revenues between 1 million and 1.5 million, right? And I get it. It's like you built up $1 million business, maybe like you grinded to get there, and you're like, look, I'm ready to transact. Like, I'm kind of tired. I want to move on. I don't know. I'm sure there are some listeners tuning in that is your profile. You're 1 million to 1.5 million. And what Jess is saying is, like, most of those practices want to transact, but there's a problem, right? Jess, what is that problem that you see?
They're not profitable. And if they are, they're not profitable to the extent that they're ready for a transaction. We kind of usually say that 1.5 is usually a place where a transaction that would be worth the business owner's time and probably, want, would be at a place if all things are done, or all things. What I would say is, like, and Kevin, and I talked about this, because I think, I would say most people in our industry realize that doing a transaction is going to be their long-term strategy or goal. And that's kind of the consolidation that's coming into our industry. Now, to get prepared to do that, they need to really start today. They need to start today. If you even are, like, the best time to start would be the day you open your business, to be perfectly honest, to set everything up in terms of really, again, just your services, your pricing, what you're paying your providers, your service mix, how, if you are an owner and a provider, how you're in the business, that's crucial too. And setting yourself up so that those profit margins can continue to grow, and you can be in a state where, you are viable for a transaction when you're ready. So I think that's a really important piece. And if you're, 2 or 3 years into your business and you're like, okay, I think this is going to be my goal in 5 years from now, start today. Like, you need to start now, and you need to understand where your profit is right now. And if you're in this, 5-6% profit margin, which, by the way, is more common than you think, right? Especially if you're under 24 months in your business journey, there's some key things you need to do, like today, right now. And it's going to be about aligning your finances and really understanding where you're focusing your time and attention and sort of those needs. So that would be my recommendation to anybody who is, thinking about, I really, this consolidation game is coming. I think there's over 100 and I want to say over 140 firms that are active in our market looking to purchase or partner with clinics. So there's a ton. And yeah, and so there's a ton. So, but I would say if you want to get in that game, and even if it's 5, 6, 10 years from now, you need to do it today. You just need to take a look at your finances and outline everything today so you can be in a really good position for the future.
I'm glad you said that. And I do see and hear practice owners saying, "Oh, I'm never going to sell. I'm never going to sell." And that's fine. That's maybe a stake you put in the ground today, but you never know what life has for you in the future. You never know. You may move. Something could happen in the family. I don't know. But to her point, guys, if you are not prepared, if you are not effectively running your practice now as if it would transact in the future, you're not running it as efficient as you can because they're going to look at these types of things. So start now. I mean, start acting as if you are going to transact at some point. And I will tell you, there is always an expiration date. You're either going to sell it strategically, private equity, to a partner, to a provider. I don't know. Pass it down to the kids. You probably want to pass it down to the kids in the most profitable way possible.
Absolutely.
Or you close the doors. Like those are the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
You might as
Yeah.
well make the most of it.
Yeah. And I agree. Like I always say to my clients, like, what we're doing today is going to give you options for the future. It's options. You could grow and scale and have multiple locations. You could acquire another clinic. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily that transaction down the road, but it's all the same. Understanding, again, your efficiencies and aligning that and being as profitable as possible. And of course, there's all these other things that people are going to say, like, oh, I have to have a good culture. And of course, those are things, a really strong brand. Those are givens to me. It's a lot of people put a lot of emphasis in that. And so they should, but it's behind the curtain that I think people are more uncomfortable with. And that's understanding that financial backbone to your business. But that's really the part that if you do some things well and sort of, align that and have full visibility of that, it will really impact your business overnight. That's just the reality of it. So,
I love it. I love it. People need to contact you. How can they find you? Right.
consultingservice.com is obviously my website, and you can go to that definitely and reach out. And of course, book a conversation with me for free, obviously. And, it's for me just to get to know about you and your business and what your goals are. And then I work one-on-one with my clients. So again, it's all customized to, your needs and your goals and what you want to do, and understanding that vision for you. And we partner together to make that an actual tangible reality with real tools, real resources, and real things that you can implement into your business tomorrow.
Amazing. Jess, thank you so much for taking the time to come on here, just give so much value, so much insight, free knowledge. I mean, you guys could just tune into this episode and take so much key benefit from it and implement these strategies into your practice. And so, I mean, I would encourage you guys, go visit her website, go reach out to her. I mean, we're talking about a gal that has a decade of experience in medical aesthetics and has an MBA. It's rare. Like this is not common, right? And it's she's a weapon. And I'm not getting any reward for saying that. It's just the truth is the truth. She's worked with lots of practices and knows what to look for. And so, I really appreciate it. And for the audience, if you guys found this particular episode valuable, my only ask is you share it. That's it. There's a colleague, there's a friend, there's a staff member, there's whatever it is, investor, I don't know, but just share it. That's my biggest ask. I do all this thing out of the kindness of my heart. I ask for nothing in return. And it's all about giving back to the community and putting knowledge out there that's going to help take your practice to the next level. So, Jess, thank you so much for joining. I'll leave it at that. Until next time, happy.